Hey guys, Fox here, and today we're going to be doing a bit of a different style video, as this isn't a video that is, let's just say, a normally scheduled Fox video, as this is a whole topic and video that was essentially made by XFL-MIKEG, part of AFN, who was talking about the idea of having multiple locations for a team in Ohio. Now, this is something that he started off before it was officially announced that Columbus would be confirmed as a market. This was back when it was rumored and was essentially being built to it. And even though we now know where a team is going to play in Ohio, it's still something that, number one, you could legitimately still do this technically, and it also provides a good blueprint for why it could work in a future expansion or relocation location. As we all know, when it comes to stadium deals, it's not about a year, it's about a per game lease, right? You are buying per game. Obviously, we know in Michigan it was like $500,000 a game, meaning that you could easily and feasibly have two separate stadiums for a single team, especially if you go by a region or state. And Ohio was one that would have been really good to do this for, but with Historic Crew being there, it's a bit different. We'll talk about exactly why Historic Crew was such a good location for a UFL team. But again, a lot of what is talked about in this video that I'm going to be talking about could be easily done for other cities, especially places with MLS teams. That's the number one thing to talk about. So let's get right on into this by first of all talking about why you'd want to do it as an Ohio team. Well, the reason for this scenario of why you want to call the team Ohio is obviously because you can then put a team in multiple locations and have it work, right? If you call a team a Columbus team and then you have them play games in Canton, it doesn't really work well. But if you have a team called Ohio, you can put them other places. It's why, let's say, the Michigan Panthers, why so many people are saying to move them to EMU, right? You're still in Michigan. And hell, even if you were to go to the Big House, which they're not going to go, we all know that, but just as, an example, they're a Michigan team, so it doesn't matter where you play as long as you're in Michigan when you get down to the nitty-gritty. That's why an Ohio team would work. Now, let's get started by talking about Columbus, the city that is confirmed to have a team. Now, Columbus, in terms of the actual place itself, is obviously the state capital and the largest city, and its TV market is in the top 40. It's a 1 million plus TV market. And in terms of the market for the UFL, it was number 15 in 2024. So it is an area that has had UFL success before, regards purely to hard TV numbers. Now, Historic Crew Stadium is a fantastic place for them to play. Lower.com Field was one that a lot of people initially thought, but they chose not to go there, which was the correct decision. Look, MLS stadiums are great, but being in an MLS stadium is technically a bad thing in a lot of ways. A lot of people seem to forget the fact that if you are in an MLS stadium that has an MLS team, you are the secondary tenant at best, meaning that you are not getting priority on when you have your games, and considering when the MLS schedule is, you're going to be going against it. We know that with Audi Field, we've seen that with other places as well. And that is why it's a big deal to be in Historic Crew Stadium, where you have an MLS Next Pro, I believe was called, team, in the Columbus Crew 2, meaning that the UFL team is the primary tenant of that location now. That's the main draw because, MLS Next Pro does not get even as much attendance as the UFL does. So now you're the primary tenant, which is a huge deal for the UFL and the expansion or the relocated Columbus team. That's why it's such a good place and why I've been so, positive about that change and that choice to go there is because you are in a place now where you are going to be able to guarantee that you have a playoff game there and have other things. But again, in regards to looking at this whole video as an idea of a blueprint of the future, think about this. If you, let's say, put an expansion team in a place that has an MLS team, right? And because of when the MLS schedule is, you're not able to host a playoff game. That's bad. But if you have a secondary stadium or a second stadium where you have essentially games flip-flop between which one, you have another option that can host a playoff game. Remember, when you're dealing with playoff issue stuff, right? It's about getting an extra date, being able to have it. It's why Ford Field is never going to be done. An extra $500K, as well as not being even like one of the tenants because of what they do. You aren't going to get a game there. Versus, obviously, St. Louis. St. Louis, they are the primary tenant, the Battlehawks. So the Dome is going to have those dates open for a playoff game. And so that's a big thing with potential future expansion areas is being able to guarantee that you can host a playoff game. That's why if you go to another state and you just call your team a state, especially if it's a smaller state where everything's within a couple hours of each other, because another important thing is the 4 cities we're talking about today are all within 2 hours of each other, right? You can drive 2 hours from Toledo to Canton, 2 hours from Canton to Columbus, 2 hours from Canton or Columbus to Toledo. So they're all within very drivable distance, so you could easily go to every game. And again, in other states in the future, That's a big deal that you could do that as well to guarantee that you can have dates for a playoff game. Because the biggest negative headline from last season was really the fact that Michigan and DC weren't able to host playoff games. Now, DC was a bit of a different story because of the FIBA World Cup, whatever. But again, if you had a secondary stadium or a second stadium, you could have hosted it somewhere else. So Columbus, really great market and a really great choice. But what about the other three potential areas? Now, the first one is the one that would be the least likely to have one of these, and that would have been Toledo. Now, Toledo is one that is legitimately an option. It has a smaller stadium. The University of Toledo Glass Bowl is a sub 40K seat stadium. Now, is it the best of them? No, there are a couple other stadiums and the other two places that are better. So that's issue number one, and obviously it's not the biggest market. In terms of a TV market, it is one on the lower end. It's like past 80. It's like ranked 81st at about 400K for the area, which isn't that great. But again, as we've seen with other teams, it could still technically work, right? If you become a team that is integral to the community and to that area, you can get good attendance. And of course, if you are able to get good attendance, you have a higher likelihood of selling merch. If you're selling merch, you're making even more money, right? That's a big thing. Yes, TV ratings are the most important thing of this league, but attendance is still a big deal because that's how you get a lot of diehard fans. And if you're in one of these smaller places that usually does not get any sort of pro team, and you're able to become a part of that community, it can be a big deal. Again, think of Birmingham. The Birmingham Stallions, they're not the only team that's in any sort of secondary or third, professional league, but they have become a big part of the community to now we're seeing the Save the Stallions movement, the change.org, petition that's become a really big deal for them, and the fact that even the mayor is trying to keep the team there. That shows how big a deal it is to have that team there. If you were to go to a place like Toledo, there's a very high chance that you could have that happen to Toledo, where you're able to become a big deal in that city and have people show up. And especially in terms of an optical standpoint, just for instance, say you got 20,000 fans per game in a place that the actual city population is under 300K. You are getting, technically, 10% of people going to there. That's an insane statistic to say out loud, right? Technically, it's obviously less. It'd be more like, 6.5, but the point still stands. Yes, the overall market area is more 400K, but if you were to hit some high number, it would look even more insane than other places. Like, obviously, if Houston were to average 20K, that's really not that impressive compared to averaging 10K in Toledo based on the overall metro population. And so that's another thing that can be a huge deal if you were to do that. But obviously, that would have been the most unlikely of them all. Now, the next one would have been Akron. Now, Akron is one that is another legitimate option that could have been done. I think a lot of people don't realize just how big the overall metro market is because, yes, Akron itself is a smaller city compared to other places. It's actually less populated than Toledo at 190,000. The caveat, however, is the metro TV market is 700,000. So significantly higher than the TV market that Toledo had. Now, this is part of the Cleveland TV market area, which obviously is one of the biggest ones at the 19th biggest overall. So you have a really good TV market in terms of that area. You are a bigger metro area than even Toledo, and you do have a very solid stadium in Info Chrysler Stadium, which is a solid 30K seat stadium. Is it on the bigger side of what the league would want? Sure, but is it still a very solid amount compared to other places like a Ford Field or an Alamodome? Absolutely. And this is a place that has had history with the Akron Professionals of the NFL back over 100 years ago, where they were champions in 1920. So you do have a true historical team there, and depending on how certain trademarks are, maybe get some sort of similar name, right? Because Akron versus Ohio could do that. And again, you are close to Cleveland. You are basically an hour away from Cleveland. I know that because I stayed in Akron when I went to the 2023 championship game, and it was a little under an hour to get to Cleveland because you just got straight on the highway, you're there. So you are really close to the big city that most people think of. Yes, Columbus may be the capital, but you think of Cleveland when you think of Ohio. And so that's a pretty big deal. You're close to that. And so you have a legitimately good option of Cleveland, and that makes Akron really solid because of that fact. And again, you are really close to Cleveland. You're also within 2 hours away from Columbus. So in theory, it would have worked. But the biggest one that could have been done if Columbus wasn't fully confirmed would have been Canton. Canton is one of those places that even now it still seems insane that they're not doing anything with. Canton, of course, was with the USFL. It hosted the championship game both years. it hosted the entire playoffs one year, and then, if I'm not mistaken, and then also the fact that you had two teams be hubbed there. Now, from everything that we've heard, they had one of the best stadium deals with the USFL. It was easily one of the best. I think the only one that might have been better would be Choctaw currently with UFL, but they had an incredible deal. The fact is they want people in that stadium. Tom Benson Memorial Stadium is also just a perfect venue. It's like a 20,000 seat stadium, so in terms of the size, it works perfectly for the league. It is at the Hall of Fame. It is Canton. It is the city when you talk about pro football. The stadium is literally part of the Hall of Fame. So you have a guaranteed tourist destination to where you can have it be where people will come to a game and then go to the Hall of Fame, or go to the Hall of Fame and then go to a game. So you have a really good thing there. Now, yes, the actual population of Canton is incredibly small at 70,000. But again, it is part of that Cleveland TV market. So 19th there. And you are still in an area that has a high metro population because, or not necessarily in, but you're near Cleveland. So you still have places where people can go to see games at. And as we saw with the USFL, people did go to that championship game, and even the Maulers and Generals games. When you look at how many people were there at some of the Maulers games compared to even the Gamblers and Showboats last year, those are for teams that didn't even really, belong there, and they had attendance that was almost on par with the terrible attendance that the Showboats and Roughnecks had. So when you think about that, if there was an official team in Canton, there's a good chance they could average a very solid number and would look really good there. Again, you are close to Cleveland, and you are very close to Akron. It may be a bit of a farther drive to Cleveland, but you're still really close overall. And so when you've had teams be there in the past, you haven't already built a relationship, it would have worked. And in all honesty, I do think there's an argument to be made that they should put a team in Canton anyway. I think that in all things considered, you could theoretically put a team in Columbus if they do well enough. If you put a team in Columbus right this upcoming season, and they end up averaging, let's just say for the sake of argument, over 15,000 a game, that's a really good number. You're like, okay, damn, people in Ohio really do care about this spring football league. Then you could possibly add a team in Canton to have two teams in Ohio, build an automatic Ohio rivalry. Even though we hope it doesn't happen, let's just say worst case scenario, the Michigan Panthers do get moved, and they're the ones that get moved to Columbus, so you don't have that that Michigan versus Ohio rivalry. Well, if you put another team in Ohio, in Canton, you can build an automatic in-state rivalry, right? It's a lot what we were hoping would happen with Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, but obviously with USFL, never came to fruition. So if you were to have this, you could have another in-state rivalry, and you move the Gambler or the Roughnecks, obviously, then you'll have two in-state rivalries that only have two teams. So you have built-in success there, and of course with Mike Repulse talking about how in the future he does want to have teams be based in their home cities or play more games there, you could potentially have it to where there are certain games where you have teams just stay in Columbus or Canton and then go against each other. And so this is an area that could easily work. You already have a pre-built relationship with the USFL and teams being there. This is a stadium that wants teams to be there, so it's a win-win scenario for both the league and the team or the stadium. And again, that would all be determined on if the UFL wants to do that. Because again, Historic Crew Stadium is just such a brilliant stadium to have that it's hard to really do this whole dual stadiumship with. But even then, you still could. This stadium is one that you could easily have one special game a year, and you can have one game be at Canton and have it be the Hall of Fame game for like the UFL or call it something different. And it can work. You have 4 games that are official home games in Columbus, and you have 1 in Canton. It's simple and it makes sense because then you have a yearly reason if you're, based in Columbus to go to Canton to go to the Hall of Fame. And that would work incredibly well. It's why this is the most likely of the options of a secondary stadium and secondary home, because this is one where even with the announcement of being at Historic Crew Stadium, which is a brilliant stadium to be at, you could still do this and have 2 home stadiums and just play 1 game in Canton because of the fact that it is a tourist destination, the fact that it is the Hall of Fame. You can make it a big deal, and as long as you keep the schedule the same, you could potentially even make it like the Hall of Fame game where at X week of X month, like let's just say the second week of April, you have a game there every single year, and then the Hall of Fame says, we got you make a deal with that, and it works out for everybody, and you have a game that's being played basically the same time every year at the same place, and it's a special game. That could easily work, but that'll do it for this video. Again, this was a overall blueprint, and like I said, this was something that was started by Mike G earlier than obviously when the announcement was fully made, especially considering the fact that a lot of things changed. We expected there to be 2 expansion teams, then ended up being the relocation stuff, then Rapol did confirm it. So some of the stuff that was initially put has changed. But overall, in terms of this, again, the blueprint for this is the most important thing to note. The blueprint of this idea could legitimately work in other places. If you put it in the right state or the right area, like a New England area, for instance, you can make it to where you can be in MLS stadiums and still almost have full control on when you play games. Because of the fact that almost every agreement is a per game lease or agreement, you can then make it to where you say, we're going to play, let's just say 3 games here and 2 here with the possibility of a playoff game. Or if the league does eventually expand to have a 12-game season, you have 3 and 3, and then you just choose the playoff game for a certain place. The playoff game is, of course, the biggest difference, and the fact that 5 games divided by 2 is 2.5. But if you make it to where you say, again, let's use this as an example since we're already talking about it. Let's say you would have 3 games at Historic Crew and then 2 in Tom Benson, and you say the playoff game will be in Tom Benson. That could work. Or if it's a place where you can guarantee you have an open spot, but you don't necessarily have to pay for it, depending on agreements you have, you could potentially make it where the highest attendance team get one. There's a lot you could do. The fact is, this is something that, number one, like I said, you really could still do this. Even with being a Historic Crew where you're going to be able to basically dictate wherever you want to play, you could still easily put 1 game at Tom Benson and just make it a special event or a special game, and it would work great. You easily could. I mean, hell, you could even try to make it be the season opener for the league every single year. You could. Have one team be the season opener every year. I mean, why not? You're a new league. You're trying to stick around and do something different. That would be something different. Have it guaranteed. This team plays every time, right? We were hoping it would be the champion versus the runner-up every year. Obviously, it's not happening. But if you do this, it would be great. But we'll have to wait and see. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe to this channel as well as ZomFox or whichever channel is being posted in a couple or something like that. Again, this is a pretty cool video to do. I'm glad Mike G reached out to me about finishing this video essentially. Again, it's a really interesting concept that could definitely work in other places. There are states where you could put a team, especially MLS ones. Again, MLS stadiums are great in size, but the issue of scheduling is the biggest problem. But if you are able to have a secondary stadium, you don't have to deal with that issue. But overall, let me know down below in the comments what you think about this whole thing. And as always, guys, have a great night.